Again, here's some more primal fears. Fear of the unknown. We have a tendency to fear that which we do not know. And this quote from H.P. Lovecraft, who's an American author, says, "The oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear. And the oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown." Now, I want to go back and relate that to the COVID crisis. And how governments and these master manipulators use fear constantly through the media, primarily as their source, the lion horn media. They use fear and confusion as a primary means to keep you in that state so that you're much easier to control that way. And again, to illustrate the use of fear during the COVID crisis, you were bombarded 24/7, 365 days a year for the last several years with nonstop how 2 million people are going to die, you're going to kill grandma if you don't wear a mask, fear of getting other people, fear of rejection, fear of losing your job, constant 24-hour fear, nonstop. And generally a lot of these fears, if you want to talk about the war on humanity, it seems like the United States, we're always fighting these invisible enemies, whether it's the war on drugs, the war on a virus, which is an invisible enemy, or one that's unknown, whether it's terrorism, and we'll talk about some of these here in a minute. But fear of the unknown is a primal fear. But they also take those primal fears, fear of the dark, fear of isolation, fear of death, all of those, and they manipulate and they amplify, and again, they use the media, whether it's mainstream media or social media, to prey on those fears. Over on the right, you see an image of Plato's Allegory of the Cave, and for those of you that aren't real familiar with it, I'm just going to touch on it here, just the best I can. But I highly encourage everybody to go look into Plato's Allegory of the Cave. It was a theory that was put forward by Plato, and it concerned human perception. And if you look at the image here, you have a set of prisoners down here at the bottom. They're inside of a cave, and Plato claimed that he was a philosopher, and he claimed that the knowledge gained through our physical senses, the five senses that we have, and I'll talk later about the five sensory deception here, and how our senses are used to the five sensory illusion, to create a five sensory illusion. Plato claimed that the knowledge gained through the five senses is of no it's no more than an opinion. In other words, and in order to have real knowledge, you have to gain it through philosophical reasoning. So if you look at this image over here, you'll see there's shadows cast on the wall, and these prisoners, if you would imagine, let's say there's these five prisoners here, and they have been prisoners in this cave for their entire life, and they've been forced to sit there and to look at the wall, and can't change positions. This is their life. This is the reality that they know. They are enslaved. They are forced to look at the wall, and up above here, up a little bit higher, you see that there's a fire behind them, and then up above that, there's a window where light can come in. And what the prisoners are seeing, in essence, is all they see is the shadows being cast on the wall. And they believe that that's reality. That's what's actually occurring. That's the only reality that they know. And so those people that, the manipulators, the puppeteers, in other words, they can come here in front of the fire, and they can cast shadows up on the wall, and make people believe anything they want, the reality of what's occurring. And if you're one of those prisoners, you believe that these shadows are real. That's the only thing that exists, and that's the reality that you know. Let's suppose that one of the prisoners escapes, and he gets outside, and he he sees what happen. He sees the reality of things. He sees that the shadows are nothing more than an illusion. That his former view of reality is all mistaken. He sees the sun as a source of life, and he discovers beauty and meaning by being outside of this cave. He sees that his former life, and see, they just guess at the shadows and which shadows would come up next, and that's the best they could ever do in there. He sees that his former life, or the former reality, that what he thought was reality, it was useless, and it didn't represent what actually was occurring. And this same prisoner, at some point, he returns to the cave to tell the other prisoners that this is all an illusion. It's all a lie, in essence. And he starts to explain to them what reality is really like, and the beauty of it, and tries to encourage them to come out and to see what is actually happening. And they refuse, and they don't believe him. They get angry at him. How dare you? You escaped. How could you leave the cave? And at some point they threaten to kill him because of what he's trying to tell them, which is the truth, the reality of what is occurring around them. So that's kind of in Plato's theory, the cave represents people who believe that knowledge comes from what we hear and what we see in the world. Empirical evidence, in other words. The cave shows the believers of imperial knowledge are trapped in the cave of misunderstanding. Empirical knowledge are trapped in the cave of misunderstanding. And the shadows represent those perceptions. People who believe that knowledge comes from what they see and what they hear in the world. The shadows represent those perceptions. The return, or the game itself, represents how people believe that one person can be a master. One of these prisoners here guesses correctly on occasion that the next shadow that's going to appear is this one here. So all the other prisoners look at him and go, "Man, he must be a luminary. He's a master about what's occurring here." Until another person escapes and actually gives them the truth and the reality about what is occurring. So anyway, I'm not going to spend any more time on that. I just wanted to give those of you that weren't familiar with the allegory of Plato's cave an idea of what that is all about. But what it does is it goes back to the fear of the unknown, and to illustrate some of the primal fears that we have, and fear of the unknown. Fear, look at, Christ. For those of you that are claim to be Christians, or understand the true esoteric meaning of Christ's words and what it was that he was trying, the message that he was trying to send. Christ came into this world. He's a true anarchist. He was a true anarchist. He represented right action in the world. He also fought against what I call the unholy trinity of his time: government, religion, and money. He fought against those three things: government, religion, and money. And the people killed him for it. We first we denied, Christ, and then ultimately we killed him for it as humans. Look at when Pilate tried to wash his hands of what was occurring by offering up the most ruthless, brutal killer that they could to take the place of Christ, and they chose Barabbas. They chose Barabbas. Unanimously, all the people shouted, "Barabbas, Barabbas, Barabbas!" Release Barabbas. We'd rather take Barabbas back into our existence. We'd rather take somebody of that nature than somebody who tells the truth, somebody who represents the truth. That's how strongly humanity And it's not just Christ. We killed most all of the messengers that have come into our existence, that have been sent to us to try to tell us the truth. We kill them. Kill them. Don't like that statement. Get butthurt over it all you want. I don't care. That's the reality. If you understand the Bible and you read the story and the allegorical meanings behind it, you'll understand that's what occurred. Some other barriers. Again, I talked earlier about the invisible enemy. This country has been at war since its inception. We've been lied into most all of them, if not 100% all of the lies we've been. But generally, it's because of the invisible enemy. Those that want to take our freedoms, that want to try to destroy our freedoms and what we stand for. The invisible enemy was most recently was foreign terrorism. Well, now it's become domestic terrorism. The enemy is no longer something that's outside of us. The enemy is the domestic enemy. The right-wing extremists, or those people that don't toe the status quo line. You are now domestic terrorists. Look at the January 6th farce. And for those of you that don't think that freedom is being destroyed rapidly, and that we're currently operating a system of overt slavery here, think about the people that, whatever you believe about the January 6th fiasco, you have people that have been accused of a crime that have been sitting in prison now. They are, in essence, political prisoners for quite a while now. Folks, denied all of their constitutional rights, and you think these senators and congresswomen or men have any power at all? Go take a look at what happened to Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz and some of these other Gohmert and some of these others that tried to go have a discussion or try to get into that federal prison where those people were being held to talk to them. What happened to them? They got shut out. They were denied entry. Here, U.S. senators and congressmen and women wanting to come in and talk to these people, find out what the conditions were, speak to them, all that, and they were denied. And it had nothing to do with their political affiliation at all. What it did, though, was illustrate that these people have no power. It should have been made. It should be abundantly clear to you now, after the 2020 election, whatever you think one way or the other about it, what it did was put in your face, right in your face, that you have no control, you have no power. We control everything. We control everything. And these politicians that you think have power, they're puppets. You know it, I know it, and yet you're going to turn around here coming up and you're going to cast your vote for whichever flavor of slavery you want next. I said it again before, and I'll say it again. Never throughout history have we ever been able to vote our way out of tyranny. Ever. Ever, folks. Get over it. Again, get butthurt as you want over that statement. Trump, nobody else is going to come save you. They have no power. They are not pulling the strings here, folks. Not pulling the strings. Back to my point here, these invisible enemies, whether it's communism, the invisible war on drugs, a virus, the invisible enemy. They use these, and they use our fear of the invisible enemy. That is not tangible. That is not constructive. Something we can't put our hands on. We can't see it. We can't identify it. I want to touch for a second, if I could, on the picture down at the bottom, the war on drugs. This picture actually is of troops, a military troop in Afghanistan deployed to protect the poppy fields. If you think for a second that we went over to Afghanistan because we thought that Osama bin Laden was there, they were harboring him, and that this doesn't have anything to do with opium or the CIA's involvement in opium and the drug trade, you're naive. You're incredibly naive, and you need to start doing some history. You need to pick up a book, and you need to start reading. Those soldiers were over there guarding that drug crop. The Taliban had, in essence, wiped out poppy production prior to the invasion and prior to our invasion of Afghanistan, and we brought it back. We brought it back. Anyway, I'm not going to spend any more time on the invisible enemy, just some things to chew on, folks, and how they use the invisible enemy to manipulate, cause fear, and confusion, and keep you controlling your behavior. The real invisible enemy is invisible slavery. It's invisible slavery. It's those people who are in a prison and have no idea that they're even in a prison. Those people that are pawns on the chessboard and don't even understand that there's a game being played. It's the invisible slavery, which is standard operating procedure now. Again, we went from covert or overt slavery to covert. We're rapidly going back to overt slavery again here real quick, folks, if people don't get off their asses and start understanding the reality of what's occurring around us. We're going to lose this country and what it means to be human at a pace that is staggering to me. Here's one that most people would not think of, and wouldn't even this wouldn't come to mind. Fear of freedom, mind control. Now we talk about mind control, exterior mind control, those master manipulators and those that do a number on us, but we also do a number on ourselves. And this is a form of internal mind control. In the first slide over here on the left, it's fear of freedom and why we don't step up versus freedom from fear. And let's answer that question here if we can. Fear of freedom and why we don't step up. A lot of people are actually afraid of freedom. They don't want to be free. They would much rather rest in their comfortable serfdom as a slave, and whether it's a house slave or not, which many in law enforcement, you could equate them to modern day house slaves. They're treated better than the slaves. By the way, if you want to talk about slavery in the law enforcement profession in the South anyway, most people don't understand that law enforcement or police officers in the South, it originated from rounding up slaves. Police officers back in those days, and when they passed the Slave Act and whatnot, people were obligated to assist police officers at that time, or law enforcement officers, in rounding up slaves, escaped slaves. That's the way it kicked off in the South. In the North, law enforcement was created, and primarily in the cities, Boston being one of the first law enforcement agencies created, primarily to protect the mercantile class. It wasn't to stop crime. The worst, they had alcoholism and prostitution and other victimless crimes back then. It was created in the big cities by the mercantile class to protect their interests. It still is today. But we fear freedom, and here's why. Primarily, it's failing to accept personal responsibility. And I went back to, and I spoke several times during the city council meetings about the complicitness of individuals who failed to act during the COVID crisis. They saw what it was, they recognized it, and they failed to act. Part of it is, a lot of people give up the responsibility of thinking for themselves or a lot of people fail to think for themselves because then they would have to accept the personal responsibility for the outcome. The same thing applies to the fear of freedom. A lot of people are very comfortable in their state of slavery. I'm very good where I am here. I got mine. I've got my 3 cots and whatever other luxury I have. I'm good. I don't want to accept the personal responsibility of what it means to be free. I don't want to accept that responsibility. I'd rather have big mommy government or big daddy government tell me what to do, tell me how to act, and tell me how to be in the world. They don't want the personal responsibility that goes along with that freedom. Quote by David Icke here: accept responsibility for yourself and your actions, thoughts, and words. You alone make choices. You alone are answerable to the consequences of your behavior. The feeble excuse that your boss required it, the establishment expected it, holds no truth or justification. And the quote down at the bottom, it's only when you take responsibility for your life that you discover how powerful you truly are. Very true words. No truer words were spoken. I mean, it's just, you don't understand, you don't know who you are, and you have no idea the power that you have. Because if you did, this house of fucking cards would come crashing down overnight. Overnight. If people truly understood and could grasp the power that they have and take it back from that 1%, gain the knowledge that they need to level that playing field and take it back, this thing would be over overnight. But most people will not. And here's the reason why. They don't want the personal responsibility that goes along with being free. Simple as that. And there is a responsibility. Freedom doesn't come free. There's a responsibility that goes along with it. Other barriers, mind control, the five sensory illusion. I touched on this a little bit. We got into the allegory of the cave story there. And how their five senses, the only things that they could see, touch, taste, and smell, were the only things right in front of them, were all that created their perceptions of reality. And our senses are flawed. Here's an example here, and I use our ability to see. We understand that there's a very small window of visible light visible to us as humans on the electromagnetic spectrum. And that light band consists of wavelengths, the color scale, if you would, the colors of the rainbow, in essence. Those are the only, that's a very small window there that's visible to the human eye. All the other wavelengths on the electromagnetic spectrum are invisible to us. We don't see them. We can't see them. Think about a dog's sense of smell, a canine sense of smell, or their sense of hearing of other animals, or sensitivity of touch, taste. We are limited in our perceptions by the limitations of our five senses. It's as simple as that, and they're subject to being flawed. Being flawed. Our perceptions of reality is subject to being flawed. We get trapped in this. The only thing that exists in our world is only those things that we can see, taste, touch, smell, and feel. And that's not the case. That's not the case. Here's another example. People take it, they believe that this desk that's right here in front of me is solid. We look at it with our eyes and we believe that it's solid. It's a solid piece of material here. But if we were to zoom in, into the microcosmic view here with a scope that would allow us to see small particles, atomic particles. As we started to zoom in on this desk here, what we would start to see is atoms and molecules and things of that nature. And within that atom itself, see a proton, an electron, and a neutron. But primarily what we see, then they'd be spinning around on this and whatnot, but primarily what we see is empty space. There's empty space. A majority of what we see there is not the atom or the proton, neutron, and electron. It's empty space around it. Okay, spinning around there. And if we were to zoom in on this desk at some point here, all we would see is particles, molecules being held together by space here. So we might look at this object here, this desk, as being solid, but that's an illusion. It's not solid. It's not. Anyway, this is just to illustrate a point on how our senses and our willingness to accept only the what comes out of those five senses in terms of what we perceive in the world and what's reality are subject to being flawed. Okay. Here's another barrier. Mind control, ego attachment. Our egos. And, we talked about one of the tenets of Satanism being egotism, the egoic mind. What we're talking about here is, again, if you took that top layer of Satanism, tenet of Satanism, our attachment to our egos and how we identify our self Freud talks about the id, the ego, the superego, things of that nature. I don't follow a lot of Freud's work. He's like everybody else. He has half truths. I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I follow the work of Jung more than Carl Jung, probably more than anybody. But in any case, our egos or our false identity. I'm going to use the example of a law enforcement officer. A lot of law enforcement officers, people in the military, have a tendency to think that their identity is that uniform that they put on and the badge. That's who I am. It's not what they do. It's who I am. That's who I am. I'm a police officer, and they attach themselves to that ego. That's not the reality. They're much. There's multifacets to every human. They're also fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters, sons, daughters. There's much more to who they are. But we get attached to the egos, the false sense of self. That's what the ego is the false self. That's not truly who we are. But yet we attach ourselves to that and protect the ego at all costs. At all costs. And it's that attachment to that ego is in the Buddhist philosophy is the root of suffering. That's what causes our suffering, is that attachment to our ego and what that ego represents. And as we get further into, I'll be talking about Gnosticism and how they view the ego. Just briefly here, a modern day Gnosticism, a lot of the literature I read on it, they like to refer to they use an analogy of a person driving a bus. Who's driving your bus? Is it the ego, the personality, or the essence? The ego is that false self, that inflated self, that false belief that's who you are. I'm rich. I'm this. I'm that. I'm whatever the case is. We got a multitude of egos that drive ourselves, and we attach ourselves. And the egos could be empowering, or they could be deflating. You could have an ego that you are attached to that says, "I'm a worthless human being. I'm a piece of shit, and I have no value." And you attach yourself to that. It's just as destructive as the ego that says, "I'm it. I'm the shit. What I know is everything, and the only thing that exists is me and my truth." Just as destructive. We'll be talking more about that, but in any case, the Gnostics use the analogy of who's driving the bus, the ego, the personality, which consists of who you've become as a result of the environment that you grew up in, and your human characteristics, things of that nature. That's your personality, and then there's the essence, the truth of who you are, and a lot of times, the Gnostics would try to get you to question who's driving your bus. Is it your ego? Is it your personality, or is it your essence? Who's driving your bus? Who's operating your mind, your destination, and where you're going? Is it your ego? Is it your personality? That part of you that exists, the public face, the persona that you put on, is it that? Or is it the essence, the true nature of who you are? Your higher nature. That little voice, they also refer to it as that little child in the room, that little voice that you can't hear because all of your other adult egos are drowning it out. I'll get into more of that later, but in any case, let me go to this quote here. The human ego prefers anything, just about anything, to falling or changing or dying. The ego is that part of you that loves the status quo, even when it's not working. It attaches to past and present and fears the future. Great quote. Anyway, the ego attachment is a barrier to self-discovery. That false belief, that false part of you, not the essence of who you are. You need to discover who that essence is. Start listening to that inner voice, that child within, that pure child, that instinctively right or wrong is inherently wired inside of that voice. Other barriers: mind control, institutionalized belief systems, and this is the bulk of what we're going to be spending a lot of our time on as we move forward here. Again, I refer to the illegitimate belief in the authority of government. Let me use it, and I'm going to stop here for a second and touch on something. When I say the illegitimate belief in the illegitimate belief in the authority of government, and how government is slavery, when I say things like that, government is mind control, government slavery, things of that nature. Let me use a real simple analogy here, and I like to use this one a lot. Let's suppose that you and I are on an island, and it's just us. There are only two people in the world. You and I are on an island, and you're growing coconuts, or fruit of some kind, or food, some substance that we can eat, and I'm not, for whatever reason. I think most of us would agree that morally I wouldn't have the right to come over and take your coconuts from you. Whether I'm bigger or not, stronger or not, most people would agree that that's theft, and that is inappropriate. That's immorally, or morally, that's a wrong. You wouldn't have the right to do that. I wouldn't have the right to come over and take the fruits of your labor, right? Would if I had a third person on the island with us here, if the two of us collectively wanted to come over and take your fruit from you, now I'm not saying that you couldn't voluntarily give us some of it if you chose to do so. Follow the line of questioning here. Would two of us have the right? Would it be okay for us to come over and the two of us and take the fruits of your labor? Two of us? No. That right didn't exist, whether it was just me or whether it was two people. Well, let's go to the analogy of government then. If I don't have that right, and two people don't have that right, three people don't have that right, five people don't have that right, how in the world can we take that right, one that we don't have, and delegate it to a group of people that we call government? How can we do that? How can we magically turn that wrong into a right? You can't. You can't. It's immoral. You cannot do it. Quit euphemizing. Quit doing mental gymnastics. Taxation is another example here. Taxation is a euphemism for theft. It's theft. Quit euphemizing it. It's a group of people called government coming and taking the fruits of your labor, your hard-earned labor, and spending it how they choose to under the threat of coercion or violence. It's as simple as that. So if you're still stuck in this mindset that you're not a slave and that government is moral on a surface, that's what I mean when I say it's illegitimate. It has no moral standing in nature and in reality. It doesn't exist. It's a construct of the mind, of the human mind, and we've given them our authority throughout the ages. It's time that we take it back. It's time that we take it back. And before you get into this bullshit, mind gymnastics about, well, who's going to build the roads? If we don't have government, who's going to build the roads? I'm going to tear that one apart later. I don't have time to do it now. I need to move on with this presentation. But we're going to get into it. All right. We're winding down here. That brings us to the conclusion of this first episode. Again, we talked primarily about the current condition of humanity. We talked about how it was slavery. We talked about worldview poisoning and how that occurs. We talked about primal fears and irrational fears in terms of mind control. We talked about people actually not wanting freedom or avoiding freedom because of the fear of responsibility that means it goes along with being free. In the next episode, we're going to touch on some of those methods of manipulation that I talked about earlier. We're going to dive deep into them. We're going to flesh them out. Some of the things that we're going to talk about, some of the methods of manipulation that you might be familiar with, divide and conquer. That's a big one. That's a huge one. Use of the media is another method of manipulation. There's a list of probably 10 to 12 methods that are used to manipulate you and your understanding of reality and to control your mind and hence your behavior. And we're going to cover all those in the next episode. And we're going to touch on how having an understanding of this knowledge levels the playing field and diffuses the power differential. This is spiritual armor. We are in as much a spiritual war as we are a physical war. You are not just a physical being. If you're one of those people that believe in take the materialistic view of reality and the universe, and the only thing that matters is matter, and that physical matter is the only thing that exists. There is no spiritual aspect to it. There is no divine creator or an intelligence in the universe. If you believe those things, I'm hopeful that if you stay with me, you follow along, you keep that open mind that I talked about earlier, that some of this is going to start making sense. It'll start becoming clearer to you, and clarity is what you're shooting for. Not confusion. You're shooting for clarity, and that's what you want. And that involves taking a perspective and having a perspective different from the one that you probably have had up to this point in your life. It's also part of being open to considering the fact that you might be wrong about a lot of the things that you once believed in. So stay with me. Thank you for your time. I truly appreciate it. Thank you for listening. Take care. We're going to end freedom, or we're going to end slavery. Agape.